Next on Investigative Report. Veterans on the street. Lincoln's promise unfulfilled. On March 4, 1865, 1 month before the end of the Civil War, President Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, uttered these sacred words to the American soldiers, past and present: to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. Because of this national concern, soldiers have stood in the breach to protect the very same citizens that walk past them down the street each day of the week. And then there are those special people who honor the sacrifice of the men and women who once bore the battle so they would not have to. Those who see former soldiers, once trusted with $13 billion aircraft carriers, now mistrusted by all. In America, there is no argument that the departed need respect. But how would Lincoln judge us by what we do to the living? And now, Veterans on the Street, Lincoln's promise unfulfilled.
On just about any street in America, you'll find homeless veterans. In fact, there are more homeless veterans than there are people joining the Army in this 1 year. Latest statistics show that there are 65,000 homeless veterans. You have a 1 in 3 chance of being homeless veterans in the whole classification of homeless citizens. Now, sure, we walk past them every day of the week. We may give them a few coins, but these people defended the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This story touches me personally. Why? Because I am a veteran. Because my mother once worked at the VA, or the Veterans Administration in Washington, D.C. She fought her way up from the lowest part of VA to the second highest position. And the highest position was a cabinet level position. And finally, because at one time, I too was a homeless veteran.
As a nation, we have grown more adept at teaching young soldiers how to survive in combat. But unfortunately, we remain woefully inept at showing them how to survive in civilian life once they depart military service. These are the roots of homelessness amongst the ex-military. I mean, why would any military command ever want to invest in a soldier's successful civilian life? The military's main focus is readiness and recruiting soldiers for additional tours. They are not interested in training them for their civilian competition. But this mindset places several thousand soldiers a year at a disadvantage as they go headlong back into civilian life, naively believing that most employers will hire them purely on the basis of having no skills and an honorable discharge. If the government was at all interested in solving the homeless crisis amongst military veterans, this would be a start. For you see, these young people represent the worn faces and tattered dreams of the homeless veteran you see each morning hanging around Starbucks for a cup of coffee. So if we don't invest the same time, money, and attention we did on their way in, someday they will replace that veteran with little skills in a higher skilled economy. A higher skilled economy absent the veteran belongs to his high school counterpart, who did not take the 3 to 20 years out of their life in the defense of their country. But you see, veterans are not in the habit of complaining about their condition. For many have learned how to adapt to the situation instead of letting the situation beat them physically down. Now, an active duty soldier is taught to adapt, improvise, and overcome that situation. Now, this is precisely why veterans end up making ideal homeless persons, for they don't complain much, nor do they see their condition as the country's fault. So in a lot of situations where a civilian would say the country did this to me, veterans do not, even though it's the same situation. Now, veterans of all stripes use their own military skills to survive in America's woods or in plain sight. As for my homeless story, Did I know that one day while standing in basic training I would be a homeless man? No. I had no more idea than the crowd of recruits, many of which would not complete the training for various reasons beyond their control. Now these forced exits from initial training turned military as what we call the duffel bag dragged, dashed the hopes and dreams of many young people, especially those delivered back to the streets of their hometowns without any safety net or family that would carry them. Now there is no 18-year-old homeless crop of young people than this. Most enlistees of the armed forces join because they are recruited out of pockets of poverty and joblessness all across the United States of America. In fact, enlistment rate increases follow the lowest wages and the highest poverty in neighborhoods and towns. A rather odd statistic, past and present, is that our voluntary military force struggles in a prosperous economy for enlistees, while a bad economy drives them straight to the recruitment office. And we will continue to recruit young people vigorously during their last year in high school. Now, studies show that high school students have consistently been a primary target for U.S. military recruitment efforts, particularly young men from low-income neighborhoods and rural areas. I wonder why. If you're desperate for a job and it is none in your town, the military will always recruit you. Now, from the insider, according to data provided by the Department of Defense, young people between the ages of 18 and 24 from Florida, Georgia, or Maine are as around twice as likely to join the armed forces than their counterparts in states like North Dakota or Utah. Now, differences exist at the regional level as well. In 2013, 44% of all military recruits came from the southern region of the U.S., despite it having only 36% of the country's 18 to 24-year-old civilian population, as seen by this map. Now, but what happens if we just use these young soldiers and return them back to pockets of poverty after their enlistment has ended? What do you believe would happen? If we were to place an overlay of the regions with the most homeless veterans, it would be this map as compiled by Desert Hope Treatment Center for Veterans. Now these statistics we believe are proof positive as to why recruits join from these states, and even more importantly, fail when they are returned to these states. But not to worry. Each day the military is refreshed with a new crop of recruits who are not readily prepared as to the financial enemies they face exiting their service as much as they are at facing down Al-Qaeda. Now you see, we predict that recruitment rates will rise with the job market teetering on the edge of a recession currently. In fact, all of the military branches are beginning to ramp up their recruiting efforts in hopes of meeting and succeeding in their fiscal year goals. As of late, Fed Chairman Powell has signed that he wishes to continue rate increases for the near future in hopes of slowing down an already overheated economy. Now, in doing this, the goal is to entice big business to bring costs in line, reduce new hires, and let go of staff already on the rolls. Yes, although these moves will hurt the broader society, a bad economy remains an excellent recruitment tool for an army that has yet to meet its recruitment goals for the last 2 years. An added bonus to a slower economy is that it pulls in the best educated and brightest minds into a force, because a bad economy levels the playing field across all 50 states. Now, as of late, a stint or career in the military is no guarantee even for those who make it through basic training. For those recruits that make it through and get past that grueling training, only a handful will retire from the armed services. The vast majority will leave when their term has ended in 3 years. Now, some will stay in long enough to see combat, and others to be in leadership positions. A lucky few will go on to become future execs in America, while others will struggle to receive careers that match their last military salary with benefits. A small percentage will have a higher chance of being homeless after their military term, and an even greater chance after a foreign conflict. You see, some will be forced out while on active duty for marrying young ladies that orbit around military bases in pursuit of an easy mark in the form of a husband on active duty. Just like in the movie Officer and a Gentleman, there's actually young ladies who do circulate around bases looking for husbands. Now today, as in the past, military bases are surrounded by towns of lesser means. This is equivalent to what the trainee left behind when he left home. Now the average enlistee left their hometown to make a successful military career, and the young lady who wants to leave that town where he has landed sees him as her ticket out. Now I can't tell you how many young soldiers I have seen driven into debt, lost their bank-financed homes, or lost their ranks from choosing the wrong wife. Now I served in the First Gulf War with a young man who survived combat but could not survive the mind games that his young wife put him through upon his return to the United States of America. Because these young men have such a lack of cooperation from their young brides, they end up getting dishonorable discharges from the military, which can affect their future job prospects, college, and the like. So it really doesn't help them in returning to the block because they had a bad wife. But youthful soldiers choosing a bad mate has never been limited to active duty marriages. Military wives are historic for changing out their soldier husbands on a whim long before they would a civilian spouse. Now, while even after service, a veteran's wife may easily abandon him in his most vulnerable period of life. Now, in other cases, she may take all he has, making him homeless. Now, we give you now a case of an elderly veteran whose wife took everything he had just before abandoning him.
Warming story in Broward where a homeless veteran is finally getting the help he needs.
BSO deputies found him actually living in his car, but now they've secured a much better place for him to stay and so much more. Local 10's Leanne Morhone is live in Davie to show us the kind of story that we need to hear, Leanne.
That's right, so you're about to meet Hayward Love. He spent nearly 10 years in the military, served 3 tours in Vietnam. Unfortunate circumstances led him to homelessness. He was living out of a vehicle right here in this very parking lot. But thankfully, a BSO deputy who was off duty noticed him, got the right people involved, and now he's getting the help he needs and is preparing for a very special trip this weekend.
This moment is dedicated for them.
Hayward Love may not be so quick on his feet, but his wit sure is.
Watch out for the wind when I run by you. It might blow you over.
The 79-year-old Vietnam veteran takes us inside his new suite.
This is the living room, bedroom.
Pretty sweet digs considering he spent 4 months living out of a van in a Davie parking lot, left homeless after his wife left him.
My wife sold my car, sold my house, and took off.
And so how long had you been living in the car?
Since May.
One September day, Sergeant Michael Weiner was off duty in that very parking lot and noticed Hayward's van.
I noticed that he was sitting in the front passenger seat by himself.
And he had some questions.
Who's with you? And he goes, nobody. Hayward was operating out of the back of his trunk with his clothing, some food, some toiletries and things like that.
When they found me, my pants would go over like this.
Once I found out and collected this information while I was there with him, I started making some phone calls.
Soon, organizations like Mission Unite and Legacy Closet stepped in, providing food, clothes, and a hotel room. Deputy Michael Francis of BSO's Homeless Outreach Unit also stepped in.
If they had not intervened, I believe that we would have lost a veteran out there on the streets.
During the 1970s, homelessness amongst American military veterans was viewed as something that happened only to older soldiers from World War II and the Vietnam era. Today, the fastest growing group of homeless veterans are young people who exited service at the end of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And higher amongst this group are homeless veteran women for the first time in U.S. history. Now here's where the Department of Veteran Affairs has a very unique opportunity to shine. And to shine by assisting our former soldiers and dependents according to their own creed. Now the Veteran Affairs mission stated goals say that an ex-service member may receive veteran readiness and employment services to help with job training, education, employment, accommodations, resume development and job-seeking skill coaching. So the Veterans Affairs exists purely to help the soldier make the transition from military life to a better civilian life if he needs it. Now, they insist that other services may be provided to assist veterans in starting their own businesses or independent living services for those who are severely disabled and unable to work in traditional employment. But in some cases, the VA, with its overbloated annual budget of $325 billion, can't even get soldiers off of the streets even if they lived in front of one of the largest VA hospitals in the United States of America. The Investigative Report has obtained a copy of a memo from Assistant Undersecretary for Health Clinical Services concerning protocol for placing homeless veterans in emergency housing since the COVID outbreak. Now, this shows you something than what's actually happening on the ground. This memo was generated to assist that homeless veterans seeking housing assistance, whenever feasible, should be placed in appropriate VA and community emergency housing on the very same day that they sought out those services. Now, although this memo was dated March 9, 2021, the VA has yet to realize the spirit of this one particular memo. Take, for example, the case of a rather large group of homeless veterans that have begun to put up tent housing outside of the gates of the VA hospital in Los Angeles, California. Now, they would not be housed in one day, and in fact, it would take the VA 2 years and a host of news investigations before those veterans were allowed to sleep on the sprawling VA campus where they had been blocked from entering.
Thousands of Americans who've served and sacrificed in the U.S. military are now living without permanent homes in this country. It is an intricate problem our leaders have repeatedly promised to fix, but could a solution finally be on the horizon? Tonight, our exclusive one-on-one with VA Secretary Dennis McDonough on an ambitious project that's now underway just steps from one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, and why it could be a model for ending veteran homelessness once and for all. Here's our Devin Dwyer.
Here's a phrase that should not exist: homeless vet.
For Dennis McDonough, like generations of VA secretaries before him, homelessness among military veterans is a confounding stain on America's promise.
The American people expect that there not be homeless veterans. The bigger problem for us is going to be if we fail, which is why I'm not going to let us fail.
While the number of homeless vets has dropped by more than half over the last decade, an estimated 20,000 U.S. vets still lack permanent homes. Dozens of homeless veterans had been living on these sidewalks on VA's doorstep just a few months ago, but they've been moved onto the property where they have access to showers, meals, and security. We saw firsthand last month in Los Angeles, home to the largest population of homeless vets in the country, how McDonough's VA is trying to accelerate progress. Feel safer over there, Jerome?
Over here, no doubt.
The encampment on the West LA VA campus is both beautiful and baffling. Veterans living in the shadow of buildings originally constructed to house and help them after World War II. Some have been sitting idle for decades. These old buildings are just down the road from Beverly Hills. They're turning them into housing for veterans on a sprawling 388-acre campus that will be the largest veterans housing project in America.
Now, what that polished piece you just saw didn't tell you is that they left out all of the negative occurrences that the veterans had to go through just to get the attention of the Veterans Administration. They didn't tell you that the buildings that were going through refurbishment are expected to be delivered about a decade behind time on an ever-increasing budget. In most cases, veterans receive better assistance at the hands of civilian volunteers and Hollywood celebrities alike. It is us, it is our duty to take care of veterans, not just VA. And take, for example, the donation that former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger gave to those very same veterans that struggled to get onto the grounds of that VA hospital in this local news clip.
An exclusive here on Fox 11, an exclusive conversation with former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is happening for our political show, The Issue Is. He recently donated to Village for Vets, a nonprofit building tiny homes.
I'm going to show you inside one of these right now.
Arnold Schwarzenegger gets a tour of a series of tiny homes he bought for homeless veterans and their animals who once lived in tents on the streets. Former governor delivering this gift just days before Christmas. I mean, that's got to feel so fulfilling, though, knowing that you're able to make this happen for them.
I'm ecstatic. I'm really ecstatic. I'm so excited. To me, this is the greatest Christmas gift.
Schwarzenegger donating 25 new units. This is what the tiny home looks like. You've got a bed, you've got space. This isn't occupied yet.
but it's going to make life a lot easier for one of these vets.
It's been a lifesaver for me.
Veteran Bruce Henry Cooper personally thanking Schwarzenegger.
He has not forgotten us.
This seemed a lot different than this.
Not right.
In early October, we joined the secretary of the VA as he toured this campus in West LA. He discovered a long row of tents on the public street with some vets who'd been camping there for years. Is there a place to put some of these people so they're not literally outside here but on the property?
Well, I think you see some of it right here.
Soon after that, action. We were here in November as Governor Newsom toured the property and announced an expansion of the tiny homes program. Former Governor Schwarzenegger saw that and decided to spend $250,000 of his own money to buy even more tiny homes.
We brought everyone together, and there was no one that said it can't be done.
How has that changed your life? It's home. Ferris Kearns spent months living on the streets. Talk about the difference between being in a tent and being in a tiny home.
No squirrels and no rats.
Rob Reynolds and AMVETS advocated to make this happen. What kind of difference does the tiny home make?
They have electricity, they have heating and air conditioning.
It's especially important on a rainy day like this one.
It proves the point that they're going through not just sunshine and wonderful weather, but they go through cold weather.
Schwarzenegger joined by his son Patrick. They both provide food to the vets.
We owe everything to our veterans. You know, they've sacrificed their lives, their familyhood, their futures for us and for our freedom.
It makes me feel good that they continuously can give something back to this country that means everything to me.
In West LA, Alex Michelson, Fox 11 News.
After seeing this, what then does the phrase "thank you for your service" really mean to veterans that are risking his or her life on unsafe streets of the country they once protected? These words of veterans ring hollow when, as a nation, we congratulate them for what they did in the past, but demonize them for their current plight. As long as we pretend not to see what we see, as long as we pretend not to know what we know, the ranks of homeless vets will continue to swell. Current statistics for homeless veterans reported by national media give us a range of 20 to 30,000 vets. Department of Veterans Affairs reports figures north of 107,000 veterans as homeless on any given night of the week. Now, this statistic number fluctuates up and down slightly due to the fact that some veterans choose to sleep on their friends' couches and others in shelters. Now, more decide to sleep unaccounted for in the woods of the United States because that is where they receive their military training. But unfortunately, the United States is not the only country that has veterans falling between the cracks of thankful service. Now, just about every NATO nation, as well as those we deem enemy, have soldiers sleeping on the sidewalks after their honorable service. This places the term "thank you for your service" in a line with "thank you for your purchase" at your local area McDonald's restaurant, and that both are not heartfelt compliments. Now, the largest difference between us and other countries that have veterans on the street is we have more vets on the street. So what are the current statistics on homelessness concerning veterans globally? This is a much larger number. Now, an up-to-date survey found that 23% of all homeless persons globally and 33% of all homeless men globally are veterans. You believe that? About 1 in 3. Now, taking a percentage of total range would indicate that there are nearly 1 million homeless veterans worldwide at some point during this year. Globally, homelessness amongst our veterans is a crisis, as in Britain, Russia, Australia, Canada. But of all these countries, the United States has the most homeless. Since the Revolutionary War, our veterans have seen homelessness. These are the first 2 known pictures of soldiers who lived since the Revolutionary War. The Civil War brought us our first mass casualty and homelessness. Our first trip abroad in World War I gave us our largest number of homeless and injured veterans. World War II followed, and that gave an even larger crop. of homeless veterans. 5 years after World War II, we will be embroiled in the Korean War. Then came along the Vietnam conflict. And then the war that I was in, the Gulf War. The United States returned to the same country in the Iraq War. Then there was the Afghanistan War. But finally, there are the women that are affected by war and by sexual harassment in the military, on the battlefield, and as they are homeless women on America's streets. It has been my opinion as once a homeless veteran that former female soldiers refuse more government help than their male counterparts. Hard to believe, right? And veterans have support all the way from the Department of Veterans Affairs down to your local corner Salvation Army as areas they can go to for help, even more than civilians. There was at one of these agencies where I was trying to get on my feet again, and they assigned me to represent all of the veterans at that particular center. And the entire time I spent there, I only witnessed one female veteran out of 100-bed veteran dorm. Now, this was shocking. Although the female dormitory had beds for former women veterans, they were filled mainly by civilian homeless women instead. Finally, the only female veteran that did show up at the facility while I was there did not trust being around former male soldiers. This is despite the fact that we tried to take her in under our wing to assist her. In less than a week of her arrival, she had gotten into so much trouble that the facility had to remove her, which was sad. Now, as a veteran, we do not wish to lose support for one former soldier. All of us guys wanted her to stay there, but she did not. She did not trust male soldiers, for which she went to in the military. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there are some veterans who just can't stay out of trouble based upon lingering issues from childhood, and others due to post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, homelessness for these particular veterans is just a slippery slope to arrest, conviction, and ultimately imprisonment. Now, PTSD can be triggered suddenly and can present in a variety of ways, and veterans with PTSD are about 60% more likely to be incarcerated than those without it. People with PTSD are also more likely to have a substance use disorder, which can also lead to incarceration. And the Veterans Affairs Department knows this very well. As a matter of fact, the civilians that follow these cases know it. You see, and if you're wondering if veterans get preferential treatment in court, that answer is a resounding yes. But conditional treatment in some states. Military veterans do get special treatment in the criminal courts. The California legislature enacted several sentencing schemes to give special or preferential treatment to veterans in criminal cases who are suffering from specific conditions. But it must be specific conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder and more that they have named. But as for those veterans currently involved in the criminal justice system, here are those shocking numbers. 1 in 3 of the nation's 19 million veterans report having been arrested and jailed at least once, and more than 181,000 veterans are behind bars today. Former service members make up nearly 8% of those in state prisons and 5% of the federal prison population. These numbers are astounding. Now, the following video clip shows you what happens when a former soldier is in prison after taking the life of his own best friend.
The guy who who I killed, man, was a really good guy. I mean, his whole name was Brian Anderson.
37-year-old Brian Anderson was attacked in his home sometime overnight.
Fresh off a tour in Iraq, Yankee went to visit Anderson, his old friend, in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Atlanta.
He and the suspect got involved in a verbal altercation over some property that the victim was storing for the suspect. This escalated into a fight.
The two fought for nearly an hour before it came to a bloody finish. When the police arrived on the scene, Anderson was dead with a dozen stab wounds, and Yankee was nowhere to be found.
A police officer stopped Christopher Timrick along Highway 78. He had a knife and bloodied arms.
What I remember doing is I stabbed him 2 times. After I was in the county jail, I found out that he had a total of 20 wounds on him, right? 12 of which were stab wounds, 6 in the front and 6 in the back. I had no idea I had even done this, right?
The Iraq War veteran claims that he blacked out as a result of post-traumatic stress disorder, stemming from a difficult childhood. It was a defense that did not hold up in court.
They found me guilty of felony murder and malice murder, and gave me a life sentence. And so for the last 2.5 years or so, I've been in prison.
I believe that in the case of a former soldier accused of murder, similar to the veterans on the street, we could change some of these outcomes with early intervention from the moment they are accepted into basic training. With the armed services pushing every type of social agenda these days, I believe they have plenty of room to promote after-military well-being for every soldier exiting their military command. And I exited the military, and several soldiers did before me and after. And there are no certain classes that teach them how to go back into civilian life. There are continuing schools in the military for college to PLDC, or what's called Primary Leadership Development course, in order to attain the rank of sergeant. There are schools for every rank above that for officers as well as enlisted. Well, there is even the National War College of the United States, which is a school in the National Defense University. This school is housed in Roosevelt Hall on Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. It provides graduate-level instructions to senior military officers and civilians to prepare them for senior leadership and responsibilities, so to prepare them on a higher level. Why can we do this with civilians? Well, even after a service member leaves the military, he or she is supposed to have the world's largest booster team in the form of Veterans Administration. But I ask you, how does one fail with the support of a nation behind them? Or is that support truly there with the Department of Veterans Affairs? The agency has been embroiled in controversy since the first federal veterans facility was established for Civil War soldiers and sailors of the Union Army in the year 1873. So by this time, you think somebody would have got their act together. Back then, it was renamed the National Home for the Disabled Volunteer Soldiers and was the first government institution in the world created specifically for honorably discharged veteran soldiers. Now, although the agency has been around in some shape, form, or fashion for over 150 years, it was only made a cabinet position by President Ronald Reagan when my mother worked in its leadership. Now, Reagan did this out of an abundance of pressure from the complaints. So, VA just doesn't get complaints today. It has always had complaints. But he did it because of the complaints about incompetence at the agency's head. Yes, although VA has many great accomplishments, it also has its historic setbacks. Now, if we look backwards from today, we see a pattern of mismanagement, cover-ups, and neglect at the largest post-military hospital organization in the United States of America. The Department of Veterans Affairs in 2014 was embroiled in a scandal over massive wait times in its healthcare system, particularly at one hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. In the aftermath, Congress and the White House took steps to reform the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, officials at the Phoenix VA hospital were accused of keeping a very secret wait list of veterans who were seeking health care. Now, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona at this particular time, so I can attest to that. And this list was kept out of sight of federal regulators, who instead sent documents that vastly unreported how long it took for patients in Phoenix to see a doctor.
Now, I dare say as a civilian, you would take these kind of wait times. Now, the secret wait list was kept out of view, for example. Patients had to wait an average of, get this, 115 days to be seen by a primary care provider. Those long wait times may have had dire consequences. The news channel CNN reported that as many as 40 veterans died while on wait list at the Phoenix Hospital, and an official investigation found the wait time contributed to those deaths. So is this what our veterans deserve after coming back from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam? Now, just recently, after many years of stonewalling, extended medical problems, and deaths from Veterans Administration, President Biden signed a compensation package for burn pit disability. Now, this VA disability compensation finally provided tax-free monthly payments for health conditions caused by exposure to burn pits or other specific hazards in air, soil, or water. Now, this was during your time in service or in combat. Now, when I was in Desert Storm, the sky was on fire with oil, so it does qualify. Now, I remember on the way exiting Iraq back towards Kuwait, how fellow soldiers and myself noticed how the sky was blackened with oil well fires. These were the oil wells that the Republican Guard set on fire just prior to leaving Kuwait by Saddam Hussein. Now, those fires caused black smoke that made high noon look like midnight until the oil wells were finally put out. Exposure to these oil well fires or the burning of trash in Afghanistan or Iraq is covered under this piece of legislation. The average compensation for exposure ranges from $1,598 to $39,304 per year, depending on the illness or condition and VA disability rating. This compensation is federally tax-free and does not change or affect your retirement income, including military or federal civil service retirement or Social Security income. But first, veterans must proceed through VA hospitals to qualify for these payments, which brings me back to the waiting scandal. An Internal Veterans Affairs audit, released on June 9, 2014, found that more than 120,000 veterans were left waiting or never got care. Hard to imagine such a large number. The pressures were placed on schedulers to use unofficial lists or engage in inappropriate practices to make waiting times appear more favorable, as in this one particular news story.
Tonight, Fox 13 investigates troubling claims from local veterans. They say they are still, after all these years, facing excessive wait times for benefits and health care.
And federal records show many may have died waiting, and a former VA insider from Tampa Bay now speaking out. And our chief investigator, Craig Patrick, has the confessions of a VA scheduler.
Our veterans served and sacrificed to uphold our values and defend our nation. But then when they needed help, our nation left many of them to suffer and die.
Why do they do this?
Records show 307,000 veterans may have died waiting for access to VA health care.
They just let you down.
And by waiting for access, we mean they could not even get enrolled in the system.
Total betrayal from our government.
And vets who do get enrolled say the wait times to see their doctors are ridiculous.
They gave me an appointment like 6 months down the road, but before that 6 months got there, they would call me and say, well, we've had to cancel because of something, whatever.
And when you listen to veterans like Keith Brown describe the runaround,
about a year before you get the actual appointment.
And then you compare it to what the head of the VA has claimed.
Our average wait times are 4 days for primary care, 5 days for specialty care, 3 days for mental health care.
Something does not add up.
Oh no, don't never do that.
Well, Nick McSwain says he knows what they're doing because he used to do it.
I used to do the same job that the people that are answering those phones are doing. They were basically directing us to pretty much go exactly opposite of what the regulations state.
McSwain says he quit his job as a VA scheduler in the Tampa Bay area earlier this year to clear his conscience.
It's possible that I could be responsible for one of those people's deaths and not even know it.
McSwain said he was trained to log when veterans want to be seen, but when those desired dates did not match up with what was available, he said his managers told him to stop.
When it's more than 14 days difference, it pops an alert on those supervisors. And what the supervisors were doing, not all of them, what they were doing, they would come, hey, Why'd you put that as the desired date? Well, that's what the patient wanted. That's how we were trained. Oh, well, no, don't do it like that.
After the VA scandal broke last year, revealing deadly delays across the nation, McSwain says his managers told him to stop generating those wait time alerts. He says they told him to ignore the veterans' requests, book whatever's available, and claim that's what the veterans wanted, even if it's months down the road.
When it says, what is the patient's desired date? Instead of using that date, we use the date of the appointment that we actually give them. That way, it shows no gap.
The VA has also faced reports of excessive and contradictory spending allegations of inadequate health care, a massive backlog of benefits claims, and a secretary position that nobody can seem to hold down. And for the duration of the term, they are going to try to fix this problem. Now, you might have noticed two different directors in the videos we have shown you thus far. During his time as president, Donald J. Trump achieved some major victories with that agency. Chief among them, the Trump administration had passed and implemented historic reforms to the Department of Veterans Affairs, or what is known as the VA. These include greater accountability for VA employees, who can no longer do phone calls like that, and increased health care choice for veterans, which means they can go to their own civilian hospital instead of just the VA. Now, 90% of veterans are said to enjoy this one act. Additionally, the president at the time signed bills that fixed long-standing issues with the GI Bill in a fiscally responsible manner and addressed the VA disability claims backlog. So you had so many thousands of veterans that were back on their own disability. Now, where VA doesn't fall down with the ball, they can usually get an assist from the government to stay down. History shows us that the United States Congress has either hamstrung or steamed making needed payments to veterans through the VA. In 1991, the Congress passed the Agent Orange Act, which said that certain diseases tied to chemical exposure would be presumed to be related to vets' military service and would make the vet eligible for benefits. And we're talking about Vietnam veterans. So they did this in a modern day, but the Vietnam War was a long time ago. But this late date was almost a lifetime from when the federal government was made aware of the sickness that soldiers had been from exposed to these one particular type of chemicals. Now, a study carried out by the Bionetic Research Laboratories between 1965 and 1968 found malformations in test animals caused by 2,4,5-T. That is a component of Agent Orange. The study was later brought to the attention of the White House in October of 1969, not yesterday. I imagine probably the mother of all blunders concerning veterans compensation occurred in the first portion of the 20th century in the United States. As the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, Congress established new benefits for World War I veterans that included programs for life insurance, disability compensation, prosthetics that they needed, vocational rehabilitation, and hospitalization, along with new federal agencies to administer them. That right there would be a challenge and a problem. Now, all these promises sounded great on paper, as promises do, but they were hard to come by without a fight. The first fight between actual war veterans and the government that claimed to represent them will come in 1933 concerning what was known then as monies owed for the Bonus Army. For those who are unfamiliar, the Bonus Army was a group of 17, count it, 1,000 veterans of U.S. involvement in World War I. Now, them, their families, and affiliated groups who gathered in Washington, D.C. in mid-1932, now they would have wanted to demand early cash redemption of their service bonus certificates. So the government promised them that they were going to give them monies after the war. Now, although World War I ended on November 11, 1918, the U.S. government had promised each soldier that had participated in the conflict a cash bonus between $600 and $800. Now, might sound like a little. Now, sure, that doesn't really sound like a lot of money, but those numbers are equivalent in purchasing power to about $18,574 in today's money. So, you see, that's a lot of money for the time. Now, the veterans were gathered by thousands in D.C. because many had lost their homes, property, or livelihood from what was going on at the time, the Great Depression. Now, Uncle Sam in his delayed gratitude had written the bill awarding them the bonus to be handed out in 1945, which would be 27 years after the end of the war that they participated in. So they're supposed to wait in the future for this money. That same delay as explained to you before. Now, this trick to the federal government will be used countless times between their soldiers and the Treasury, with the Congress insisting that it was best to raise the money over time before giving it out, as opposed to accepting the debt now to pay it off later, just as they do with anything else. Now, this would be the same Congress that spent money like drunken sailors and wild abandonment on their own special interest projects even at that time. Now, the bonus law provided a cash payment equal to $1 for each day of wartime military service, with an extra 25 cents for each day spent overseas in the war. $1 in 1933 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $23.22 in today's money, $22 over 90 years ago. So over 90 years ago, that's a long time. The organizers called the demonstrations the Bonus Expeditionary Force to echo the name of World War I's American Expeditionary Forces. Now, while the media referred to them as Bonus Army or Bonus Marchers. The demonstrations were led by Walter W. Waters, a former sergeant in the U.S. military just prior to the war's end. Now, on July 28, 1932, the U.S. Attorney General William D. Mitchell ordered the veterans removed from all government property. The Washington police met with resistance, shot at protesters, and 2 veterans were wounded and later died. President Herbert Hoover then ordered the U.S. Army to clear the marchers' campsite. Army Chief of Staff at the time, General Douglas MacArthur, not yet famous as he would be in World War II, commanded a contingent of infantry and cavalry supported by 6 tanks, and the Bonus Army marchers with their wives and children were driven out and their shelters and belongings burned to the ground, as seen in this video.
The president ordered the evacuation of the veterans from downtown Washington.
Now you bring in the troops. When MacArthur moved his troops to the affected area, he knew exactly what he was going to do. And he adorned himself in his dress uniform along with his major aide, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The force stepped off at 4:30 p.m. More than 200 cavalrymen spread out across Constitution and Pennsylvania avenues. Behind them came 400 infantrymen, followed up by tanks and armored vehicles.
A second smaller bonus march in 1933 at the start of Roosevelt administration was diffused in the month of May with an offer of jobs with the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, at Fort Hunt, Virginia, which most of the group accepted. So pay them off if you can't help them. And those who chose not to work for the CCC by the May deadline were given transportation back home. In 1936, Congress overruled President Roosevelt's veto and paid the veterans their bonus 9 years early. Now, free of any Great Depression or recession in this country, veterans can be homeless for a myriad of reasons. Now, my wife and I ended up that way after losing our business during the last Great Recession during the Obama administration. Now, many veterans during that same time period lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings, everything, and their spouses walked away. This time period will test the mettle of the Veterans Administration and reveal several cracks in the system they were believed once resolved.
Veterans are not only in our city streets. Some live in the woods, just like you see me come out there. But what do we do? What do we do with a nation that would let their veterans sleep in something they would only be in a combat situation? What is the way out? And is VA the way out of the woods?
At the time my wife and I were forced into homelessness, we handled that period in our life with about as much grace as anyone would who would have to sleep camouflaged in the forest of Florida or in a constructed cardboard box in the middle of a city park. Now, as you can see here, my wife is sticking her head out of the box for everyone to see, and for me, always an opportune time to take a picture. I explained to her back then, as I tell you now, that homelessness as well as problems you face as a veteran are something you go through. Those problems and challenges should not define you as a person. It will be a while
where we were going through that for a very trying time after the death of my mother. So that was 2 blows. And I would find out how much I really needed the Veterans Administration. Now, when I was a kid, I played on her job. She would invite me there several times, a small child. I never thought I would need it, but I needed it. And as I got older, I faced illnesses that one should not go through while being without a sanitary place to live. I would need surgery on an artery leading to one of my kidneys. My wife would get cancer and go through 2 life-saving surgeries herself. Now, finally, I would face the facts one day when confronted by my doctor that I would need open heart surgery to repair a damaged heart valve. It was at that time that I knew I needed to make a move to get off of the streets. I was reminded of the advice that a police officer had told us when he found us laying on a sidewalk. This one particular officer was much nicer than others. He said it is not a problem to be down in life. He said whenever you hit your personal bottom, just like a bouncing ball, make sure you bounce back. And this advice is true for any veteran. Most people believe that the veterans living on the street, in the woods, or in shelters have a one-size-fits-all problem, but it is not. We are varied individuals, regardless of you're male, female, black, white, or whatever.
This is still an issue here in Austin, even if more of the people are out of sight because of the camping ban that was reinstated back in May.
Connor Board learns why the people who served our country have a higher chance of ending up on the streets, and more importantly, we talk about what we can do about it.
Serving our country is one of our nation's highest honors.
I started out doing communications and then got stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and was in an artillery unit and ended up working with the forward observing teams in the artillery units.
I was an infantryman with the Army. I spent a year in the DMZ in Korea, a year in Iraq and Baghdad from 2004 to 2005.
Blake Holbrook, a Purple Heart veteran who had 5 men in his unit get killed overseas, knows that this service can come with a price.
I ended up in 3 psychiatric wards, mostly because the VA was just giving you a lot of medications. I ended up in a substance abuse rehab for those medications where they gave me more medications. And really, I would have been a homeless veteran had my family not stepped in.
For others like James Lambert, who moved to Texas with his friends after their time in the military, no one stepped in until later on.
I struggled a little bit more than they did getting out, and couldn't afford the place I was staying in. And after a while, I ended up living out of an 82 Ford Ranger in a Walmart parking lot.
James lived in that parking lot for a year, struggling with alcohol and painkillers that he got hooked on after being treated for back pain.
When I was going through that situation, my lowest point, I considered suicide, because I was like, there's no way out. I can't deal with it anymore.
He never shared that he was homeless when this was happening. This secret struggle is common among veterans.
Wearing the uniform, you have so much pride, so much respect for yourself and others that when you lose your home, it's embarrassing, it's sad.
Now both Blake and James are using their experiences to help others.
Some veterans have PTSD issues based on their way experiences. Others are triggered by their negative upbringing that manifests itself once they were placed in a stressful environment. Most unfortunate for everybody involved, there is a new crop of homeless veterans that for the first time in history are the youngest on the streets. These ex-soldiers of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars are lost. Now, since the Congress, the president that ran those campaigns, and the VA weren't prepared to handle what would happen with multiple deployments on the human psyche, they have a new catastrophic problem on their hands. Now, multiple deployments beyond the Vietnam War, both unwinnable wars that result in the deaths of their friends, divorces from their spouse, and loss of family connection, has yielded to the VA's own analysis an average of 20 veterans committing suicide each day of the week. That is a very high number. And there are several programs in place to catch veterans who need help, post-military exits, as well as those who need to help and who wish to harm themselves. But before VA can help any ex-soldier, they require them to register at their local VA hospital, which takes less than 15 minutes on average. There they can get their DD-214, which is a document of an exiting soldier, if they have lost it, and their new hospital identification card, which is good for all post-service benefits and civilian hospitals. When veterans come to the VA hospital, they'll be received at locations just like this one behind me. It doesn't matter whether they're homeless or they have a job. Whether you can pay or not does not matter to the Veterans Administration. Let's go inside. Okay, veterans are authorized to come to any VA hospital, and here you can always see the Veterans Administration lead, the President of the United States, followed by every seal. The Great Seal of the Veterans Department of Affairs, many pictures that represent veterans, the seal of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. Veterans can always come here for service, whether they're homeless or they live with their family. As we close this investigative report, I ask you to remember, on the cold streets of any town that you can find, if you ever pass a veteran, you'll know that person by, as I said before, their DD-214 or their medical card that's given to them in the military. But these people are not just dirty people. They're not just lazy people. They are the defenders of the Constitution of the United States of America. The people who defended the home front so you wouldn't have to. For Investigative Report, this is Charles Rivers. We'll see you again next time.